it's Susie here from Esoteric Trading Solutions. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all looking after yourself, particularly at this terrible time. I hope you're looking after your family and friends. You're being kind to yourself. You're being kind to your family and your friends. And you be kind to your animals, your beautiful cats and beautiful pussycats. I just hope people aren't dumping their animals at the moment. That's often what happens with these horrible situations when people are unemployed. But please do look after your animals. We just don't want to see more animals on the street, that's for sure, where they're sick and not fed properly. And please, look, just try to maintain your empathy and, your kindness to other people. This situation we're in is just, I have to say, pretty alarming, really. It's a change in a lifetime. We've never, all of us, no matter what age we are, we've never seen anything like this before. Life has changed so quickly, and not for the better, I have to say. And it's frightening just how quickly life has changed within the matter of 4 weeks. As you know, last week, Americans applied for unemployment benefits, and it was another 6.6 million. And within 4 weeks, it's never been so high. Literally 17 million, up to 17 million Americans have applied for unemployment benefits. And the concern is that obviously a lot of people can't even get through for unemployment benefits, or they can't, get on the phone. Some lady, poor thing, had to ring 2,000 times to try and get through for benefits. People are queuing up. It's the same here in Australia. You can't get through. The government say they're there to help people, but clearly they tend to be helping the big market, the big financial markets and the people within financial markets. And again, it's a bit like mainstream versus Wall Street. Wall Street's getting all the money, but what's happening with mainstream? Mainstream is seriously suffering, and people with small businesses are being put out of businesses. People that work in restaurants and cafes and retail are being put out of business, and certainly that's the case in Melbourne, Victoria, where I live. There's a lot of people that work in retail. We're known as the restaurant city, and a lot of people have lost their jobs in cafes. We're a coffee culture, and a lot of people have lost their jobs in cafes and coffee houses and restaurants and that sort of thing. So it's a very scary place, a very scary environment at the moment. The US has come out, the Fed came out with another 2.3 trillion in funding. That brings up their funding to about 3 trillion. They just keep printing more and more paper. And you wonder where this money's coming from. Seriously, what's it being backed by? Nothing. And they just keep printing and printing and printing more money to put into the financial markets. And all it tends to do is push up Wall Street, pushes up Wall Street and every other financial market, risk market, but doesn't do anything for the individual at the ground level. And that's very worrying. And that's what we've seen in the past as well. We saw it in 2008 with the collapse. We've seen it before. And, all it does is just pumps more money into the market. So what happens is the equity market goes up dramatically, like Wall Street, the Dow goes up dramatically, and the S&P and all risk assets, but yet it's not actually helping mainstream, the people on the ground, me, you, that are trying to survive with a business or trying to bring up a family or whatever. It's a very scary thought at the moment. Clearly, the policy that they're employing, I don't believe is going to work. All it does is prop up, bad toxic assets. Now, what the Fed's done is they've also come in and said we're going to buy high yield junk bonds. We're going to basically bail out hedge funds. We're going to bail out, corporate debts. We're going to bail out, all the airlines. And seriously, again, this again smacks of 2008, where literally the Fed basically increased their balance sheet from literally 1 billion to about 8 billion. And honestly, it smacks of socialism, where they bought equities. They bought, literally Citibank at $2. They bought Morgan Stanley at $4. They bailed out all these big banks, all these big investment banks. And they bailed out all the big CEOs that are on millions and millions and millions of dollars, okay, to effectively go to socialism. And all it helps is the big CEOs at the top level, okay, that earn millions and millions of dollars, while the small people down the bottom actually starve. And it's the same story again and again. While the big people at the top, get paid their risk money, millions and millions of dollars. The small people at the bottom with their retail working at the retail level with clients, in the branches, lose their job. And all the Fed is doing is bailing out these people, and these people still get paid their big sums of money. And yet we're now in a socialist structure where the Fed keeps buying the assets, the equity assets. They keep buying mortgage-backed securities, commercial-backed securities. They buy junk bond and high-yield bonds. And, this story, they're even bailing out hedge funds, which is just crazy. I mean, hedge funds, basically trade the markets. They can buy and sell all different, trading instruments within the markets. They're not hedged. It's a misnomer for a hedge fund to be called a hedge fund because they don't hedge. They basically take big bets within the markets, whether it's bonds, whether it's commodities, whether it's equity, whether it's high yield, whether it's options. They can do anything. And literally these guys get paid, or girls get paid, a lot of money to be hedge fund managers. They generally charge 1 to 2% in terms of fees, and also if they make profits, they charge 20% of the profit. Now, the thing is, now the Fed is bailing these guys out with because they've lost money, but these people get paid a lot of money. So again, it's Wall Street vis-a-vis Main Street, and it's just not a great solution. We see it here also in Australia. There's nothing the government is doing to basically help the small business, or the individual person. If someone can't pay their rent, or they can't buy their food, or whatever it is, like America, you try to ring up the unemployment benefit place. I've had friends that cannot get through, don't have any money, and literally, I've had to lend them money, seriously, to buy food, and it's the same thing in America. And yet Wall Street, the high yield toxic bond market, the hedge funds, the big CEOs of these big banks that lose a lot of money, or, the airlines or whatever it might be, continually get bailed out by the government, okay? And then we come into this socialistic story because the government then owns the equities of Wall Street. It owns the toxic debt of Wall Street. It owns the junk bonds. It owns the airline companies, and all these CEOs at the top get paid excuse the French, a shitload of money. I read something, one of the big top guys from Wells Fargo or whatever, and they get paid 133 or 183 times what the lowest person gets paid. Someone like Jamie Dimon, for example, from JP Morgan, gets paid something like $150 million. And yet the average person would get paid $40,000 or $50,000. And yet it's the average person that keeps losing their job, and it's just not right. Seriously, it really isn't right. And I just think, this is going to end up, the depression, a depression is coming, and unemployment levels are going to be sky high. Now, in the depression we saw in the 1930s, depression, we saw unemployment around 30%, right? And, it's the change of these figures which has been so dramatic. In the last 4 weeks, we've seen 17 million, nearly 17 million people in America apply for unemployment benefits. And, my figures analysis say that out of 320 million people, populous in America, it's something like 120 million that are living, close to the poverty line. They're one paycheck away from poverty, and if they can't get help from the government, which is fundamental, the government should be focusing on the people, not on Wall Street, which is just making 1% of the people wealthy compared to the rest of the people, the 99% that don't make any money at all. I mean, it is becoming socialism in a big way, and it is very, very concerning. And the same thing happened in 2008, exactly the same thing. And it doesn't surprise me. Wall Street will be higher than it ever was before because they keep bailing out Wall Street and the wealthy. People are queuing up. They're trying to find jobs. It's just not happening. And yet, we see every risk market in the world go up. The International Labour Organization published an update of the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown measures, and said that these changes, we're not going to, these are quite dramatic changes. We're going to see levels of unemployment like we saw in the Depression. And I agree with that. I really agree with that, okay? Currently 81% of the global workforce of 3.3 billion, 81% is affected by full or part-time work closures. 3.3 billion in the world, right? If you've got that situation, what do you think is going to do to the economy? It is drastic. It is devastating. There's going to be major job losses, and I'm seeing it everywhere, even with my friends. People cannot get work. They can't pay their bills. And yet Wall Street constantly keeps getting bailed out, constantly by governments. I mean, even Canada had, a million job losses. Very scary indeed. Okay, very scary indeed. And we're seeing it even with, at all levels, health workers, people in that look after people, mental health and everything else. And what we're going to see is more and more people on the street, with mental health issues, more poverty on the street. And honestly, that's just not a world that I want to live in. I mean, it's just shocking. And I think time and time again, governments just let the populace down. I mean, we're supposed to employ the government members to be in government, and they constantly look after their own needs, constantly, and the 1% at the top. And the 1% at the top just keep getting richer and richer. And honestly, I just think the whole structure of government has to change, because all it's doing is making Wall Street richer and richer and richer. Okay, and as Powell says, there's no limit to the length of support, but the length of support is going to Wall Street and not the person on the ground. And to me, it's so obvious. It's so obvious what's going on, and these people cannot see what's going on. People cannot. The average person cannot get through to get benefits or anything, or to get help. I mean, they can't even afford to buy food. So again, why doesn't this money go to the people directly and go to businesses directly rather than Wall Street? We've seen that it doesn't trickle down from Wall Street, and that's a fact, absolute fact. So, it is a scary, what's going on here, honestly. All we've seen is huge rallies in the S&P and the Dow and every financial market asset out there. Wall Street is cheering, of course, because they become wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, while the little people just, get poorer and poorer and poorer. I mean, literally the Fed is printing money, and according to this article, 60 million in currency every minute, okay? Unlimited cash at its disposal. But the thing is, there's nothing backing the cash. Where does the money come from? Where does the money come from, okay? And that's, what I keep saying. This is just becoming out of control, and I just think that the little person is going to suffer terribly, and it's always the way, which is not a great story at all. We're coming into levels of literally the Depression levels, and even the International Monetary Fund said the same thing. They were quite bullish forecasts 3 months ago, but now they're so concerned that we're going to go into the deepest recession or depression since the Great Depression. And the poorest countries are going to suffer the worst. And the International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said on Thursday that literally it's going to be a shocker. Literally you can't help people enough at the lower level. People need immediate relief, and it's just not getting there. And if that's the case, there will literally be starvation in the street, literally, and that's what we'll see. More and more people on the street, starvation on the street, more and more animals on the street, which is horrible to say. And it's just really sad, and it's because the governments are not putting the money where the money should go, and that's pretty much my view of things. If we go to the financial markets on Friday night, all we see is markets up heaps, okay? The Dow, has been up, got down to about 18,000. It's now down and now up to about nearly 24,000. The S&P's up there again. They're just going to keep buying and buying risk assets, okay? That's a fact. If you look at The Dow's only down 8.3% now, okay? At its worst, it was down 30%, if you remember rightly. The S&P was down about 30%. All these markets are coming back because the Fed just keeps ploughing money into the system like there's nobody's business, right? You know, within a week's time, you're going to see all these probably in positive territory. And the 1% at the top are getting richer and richer, and the diversity between the poor and the wealthy, the extremely wealthy, which is 85 billionaires in the world, only 85 that own the wealth of 4.4 billion people in the world out of 7.7 are getting wealthier and wealthier. You know, this structure of system is not working, and when people don't have food in their bellies, and when they can't look after their children and can't pay for their living or pay to feed their animals, this is the stuff of revolution. Seriously, it really is. And, you know, it literally, you know, I've had to lend money to my friends that have lost their jobs in cafes and everything. You know, if you don't have any money to feed yourself or for your children, you know, this is the stuff of revolution. And as far as I'm concerned, this has been government created just simply because the government, again, time and time again, keeps bailing out the extremely wealthy. The extremely wealthy at the top, the 85 people in the world that own billions compared to the normal people like you and me. And honestly, this will be the stuff of revolution. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Absolutely convinced of it. I mean, not only that, you know, as I said, the Fed's talking about bailing out, you know, all sorts of fixed income, corporate credit, high yield stuff. You know, they're literally using money to buy any sort of toxic asset they can imagine, you know, all this sort of stuff, you know, emerging market debt spreads, everything, and then also bailing out hedge funds. And again, you know, these hedge funds and people at the top, like these big banks, are on a shitload of money. You know, they're on millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? And they get a direct bailout quicker than you or me get a bailout when we go to, you know, to try and get unemployment benefits. I mean, you know, in Australia, people can't even get unemployment benefits. You know, I've heard of people that have lost their job, and you know they've got to go through all the hoops of, you know, getting their you know, tax report, getting their, you know, bank statement, you know, proving they lost their job, you know, getting a statement from the employer, all this sort of stuff, and yet at the same time, you know, they can't even buy food. I mean, and this is for a benefit of $230 a week, seriously, and yet federal governments like the Fed are prepared to throw in trillions to bail out companies, big companies and their CEOs at the top, who, mind you, still get their huge bonus packets and everything else. Larry Fink from one of the big banks gave himself a 5% pay rise. He only earns now 183 times more than anyone else out of the organisation, but he gave himself a 5% pay rise, while the rest of us are living in depression. Seriously, something's got to change here, guys. I've got to tell you that. Something has got to change. And, you know, this is the stuff of revolution. It really is. It's the stuff of revolution. You know, on one side, we do have high inflation. It costs a living. It costs a fortune to make a living in the country. And, you know, it costs a fortune to go and buy food. It costs a fortune for electricity. It costs a fortune for gas. Costs a fortune for anything, and yet all the figures that come out of, you know, the statisticians and the government, we have low inflation. It is just garbology. You know, while we've got a situation of high inflation, there's no jobs around, people can't even feed themselves, people can't even pay for the rent, and the government, all the governments do is bail out the top 1%. As I said before, this is the stuff of revolution. You know, and I'm not left-wing or anything, okay? I'm not at all. Down the bottom, it's just not even making ends meet. You know, it's just absolutely madness as far as I'm concerned. Madness. And, you know, as I said, it is the stuff of revolution, I have to say. And, you know, it's scary. It's really scary because a lot of the economic indicators have come off dramatically, and this is going to take a long time to recover. It is a sobering thought, but that's the way it is, and it's not a great story, I have to say. But anyway, please do look after yourself. Please be kind to yourself, your family, your friends. Just Try to keep your heads up. We have to do the best we can. Please look after your animals, and please just try to maintain your empathy to people in the world, because we're all suffering if we're not the 1%. That's a fact. Anyway, guys, I'll talk to you soon, and please do look after yourself. Thank you.